In these times of uncertainty, it's all the more important that we keep collaborating, informing, and inspiring each other, so that we can be smarter and better tomorrow. Welcome to the Pakhuis de Zwijger livecast.
Hello everyone. On behalf of Pakhuis de Zwijger, welcome to the livecast about emerging stories. My name is Rut Kronenburg and I'm your host of today. This is already the 14th episode of Emerging Stories, the talk show where we dive into the importance and the future of independent journalism. Especially during these crazy and uncertain times, access to reliable information is even more important than ever. In this series, we are going to look into the different aspects of journalism. We touch upon the problems and we look at the solutions. And we do that with international guests, with journalists, photographers, with media experts all over the world. And today we are going to talk about money, because actually the financial situation of journalism is, to say the least, not so good. Why is that? And how can we solve that? We are going to talk about that with two important guests of today. We have in the studio with us Stijn Frankvoorder. Stijn, welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're head of membership from Are We Europe?
Yes, that's true. I'm responsible for the membership program within Are We Europe. Yeah.
Going to talk about that later.
Yeah, sure.
And via Zoom we have with us Jeremy Drucker. He's CEO of Press Start. Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And we're going to hear and learn a lot more about Press Start later on. Midway, we're going to talk about some photos of a documentary and portrait photographer, Sarah Waiswa from Uganda. And that will be about 4:30. But first, let's go back to Are We Europe? Stijn, what is Are We Europe?
Well, Are We Europe was founded in 2016 in a time where Trump just got elected. The Brexit was happening and there were a lot of right-wing parties in Europe. And in the media, there was like this certain image being sketched about Europe that didn't really resonate with us, at least. It was very much like, is there room for Europe? And is the project actually working, or should we maybe stop it? And that didn't really resonate with us. I mean,
and us being?
A collective of journalists, like the founders and me as well.
And not only Dutch journalists, I assume?
No. It started in Amsterdam, actually, but it spread out all over Europe.
Right.
Of course, we should do that. But what we wanted to do is that we wanted to provide a counter-narrative to like this negative image that was pictured by the media, in our opinion at least, because we can travel anywhere, we can study anywhere. Sometimes you have friends that are, I have friends living in Spain and Norway that I have more in common with sometimes than my own neighbor. So we wanted to provide that counter-narrative and put Europe in a sexy, youthful and inspiring way, the way that we saw it. So that's the reason why we started Are We Europe. Yeah.
And since we're talking about money, how is Are We Europe funded?
Well, there are different ways in which we're funded. We have studio assignments. We have our membership program, which I'm responsible for. And then we also have grants or accelerators that we're part of. So we have those three main streams of income within Are We Europe.
And later on, we're going to dive into the membership model, right?
Yeah.
And what does your job entails?
So to explain that, we have to go back a little bit, because we have, for example, a magazine, we had donations. So it used to be that we had these small streams of income, so to say,
right,
within Are We Europe. At the same time, we felt that we had a relationship that was very much, I give you a magazine and you give me money in return. So what I did I think it was March, more or less, we started to investigate whether or not membership was something that would fit Are We Europe. And that's the reason why we started to look into it. We saw that there was a fit. And from there on, we kind of continued this search and this journey. And so far, it's been really good. We have a lot of steps to take, but we really like this approach of being in touch with our members, communicating with them, and not having this transactional relationship, but having the feeling or creating the feeling of joining a club. That's what we try to do.
Okay, and how big is this club now with journalists? How many journalists?
Journalists is 750.
Okay, so it's a big one, actually. Okay, thank you. Jeremy, I think most of the people who are into journalism know you from Transitions Online, right? And how did
Probably more so, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. But can you tell us a bit more about Press Start? Why did you actually found it?
Sure. Well, a couple of reasons. One, I would say a major reason is we are a journalism trainer as well, Transitions, and we had trained hundreds, thousands of journalists over the last 20 years and kept coming up against this obstacle that we had trained very talented, very smart people, very entrepreneurial, and they went back to their home countries and wanted to do the stories that they were capable of doing and just had no financial way to do that, either at their own publication or just locally. So we came up with the idea to try to connect those very talented journalists on the ground with donors around the world who might be willing to fund them. So in some ways, this is, you could say, maybe a kind of market correction. There's not enough money in many countries around the world, especially those places where the media is repressed, to support this kind of independent journalism. So this was a way to try to create more opportunities for stories that wouldn't normally get published to be able to actually make it into reality. So I think that was one major reason. Another was also just trying to come up with our own methods. We're trying to fund our own journalism. At the time, there had been one crowdfunding platform called Spot.us, which was one of the first ones to fund journalism. And we were trying to think how we could potentially adapt that for our own purposes. And another key part of that was also trying to humanize the people out there on the front line trying to produce journalism under very difficult circumstances. We felt that that was the only way to really try to raise money internationally, was to tell the stories of the people doing this kind of brave work.
And when you say own journalism, what do you mean by that then?
I'm sorry, could you say that once again?
You said that you were looking for ways to fund your own journalism. What do you mean with own journalism?
As you said, I also run an organization called Transitions, which has had a first print magazine and then solely online magazine for the last 20 years. And we are telling stories from Central and Eastern Europe using largely local journalists. And like you just heard, our model is also quite similar in a combination of different sources. But as a nonprofit news organization, we're also trying to come up with innovative new ways to fund our own journalism. And we thought crowdfunding might be a way to do that. But then we quickly saw that the need was much broader than our own, and not just Central and Eastern Europe either, but many journalists in Africa, South America, the Middle East were in the same position of having a lot of good ideas, but not having enough money locally to fund the stories they wanted to do.
Right. And since we are talking about money, how is Press Start then funded?
So we've also subsisted on grants over the years. We had an initial grant from the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a US-based organization. We also had some money from Google, and now we also have some smaller grants. Other than that, we take 10% off of each donation made for a campaign. So it's a combination of grants and then also this percentage of each donation that is made to the platform. But we too would like to start up membership to support this in the long term.
Okay, so you want to know more about Stijn's model then, more or less. Thank you for the introduction. In a bit, we will dive deeper into the subject and mainly looking and focusing on the problems. First, we are going to hear what the people on the streets think about this subject. Our flying reporter went to the streets and asked passers-by what they think about paying for the news. And do they? Let's have a look.
Ja, ik blijf toch het nieuws volgen. Gewoon omdat ik dat interessant vind. En ik wil graag op de hoogte blijven.
Ik heb zelf nooit voor nieuws betaald, omdat ik nooit ook echt de krant heb gelezen.
Nee, ik zelf doe dat niet. Nee. Ja, ik geef daar geen geld uit. Als ik nieuws wil kijken, dan kijk ik gewoon naar het journaal. Zo. Ik kijk wel eens met mijn moeder mee, zoiets. Maar voor de rest niet echt dat ik er zelf geld aan uitgeef, zodat ik een abonnement ergens op heb. So.
I don't really read news lately, because I feel like we have too much information at all times, and everything changes so drastically every day. I'd rather read books and read news from history. So like, I would usually read headlines every week of what happened during the week, but I wouldn't read it every day. It just takes too much time.
De krant, die heb ik net betaald, weer heel veel, per 3 maanden. Internet. En de NPO-nieuws kijk ik altijd op mijn iPad. Maar ook damesbladen. Ik heb heel veel verschillende damesbladen. Maandbladen en weekbladen, die lees ik ook heel veel.
Ik zelf eigenlijk niet. Meestal volg ik het nieuws via televisie of mijn mobiel. En voor de rest, ik betaal niet voor de krant, nee. Ik weet dat mijn ouders dat nog wel doen, maar ik ben pas mezelf gaan wonen, dus ik niet.
No, I don't pay for newspapers. I think we get news from a bit everywhere, in the social media or even on phones you get notifications from news left and right. So I don't think it even requires people to pay for news much anymore. I guess back in the days when you would have to buy the newspaper to get some news, it would be more important to buy news. Now you can get it just freely, so I don't think there's a requirement to even buy a subscription to get news.
Well, that's obvious. News is for free. Why should they pay for it? Jeremy, is that in short, you think, the biggest problem or the reason why it's so problematic to finance journalism?
I don't know about the main reason, but it's definitely up there. I think, this was collectively a mistake of the whole industry from the very beginning to just put everything out for free. So then people got used to it, and it's really hard to break that habit these days. We've seen it slowly working. I think it's a longer-term process, but people are understanding the need to pay for online services, films, music. So hopefully news is next in line, but it's a longer-term process. As you can see in that video, it was mostly the older people who paid for subscriptions, the younger people who didn't really see a need for it. But I mean, it's a whole long process of trying to convince people that there is value in it. It is something of a public good that would be difficult to finance otherwise.
Yeah. And Stijn, what do you think is one of the biggest reason why financing journalism is so problematic?
Well, I would like to give it more of a positive twist, actually.
Okay.
Even though I think it is not the easiest thing to do, I think that as journalists, we should be able to adapt the product that we're delivering, and that is journalism in itself, should tailor to the needs what the users, what the readers actually want. And I think that there are some great examples out there that are being innovative about it and can actually make sure with a membership model, these are the examples that I have, but they're able to stay alive and actually make really good journalism and actually also get the attention from people to keep on reading it. So that's...
But you agree with me that a traditional business model, advertisement and subscriptions, actually that is not sufficient anymore, right? For the journalists to do their work.
Yeah, I agree with that part. But what I do think is missing right now with advertising, for example, and with subscriptions is that it's very much focused on like making sure that you have as many people as possible. But I think that the key in here is to build up a relationship with people. And what you see with subscriptions, for example, is that it's often a one-way thing. Like you get your newspaper and that's about it. And I think that one solution for that would be to really create a relationship with your users. And I do agree with like subscriptions going down and subscriptions going down. That is a problem, but that's something that we actually try to tackle. So I try to take it from a positive perspective.
You are looking for more interaction with your viewers.
Exactly. I try to include them within the conversation. I try to make sure that it's not something, hey, this is what we state, but also trying to make sure that their knowledge or their voice is being heard in it and that they feel part of this news instead of something that they just want to read or just consume. So that's kind of the thing that we as Are Europe want to move away from.
But Jeremy, a question for you. I mean, the advertisers are still there, but they are mostly on the bigger platforms of social media, right? And they, of course, kind of publish the news, but not being the original publisher. And I think that is part of the problem. I'm curious to see how you think it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I did see that. I think Google has been experimenting now with paying publishers, at least in some parts of the world, for the content that's highlighted on search. Not exactly sure how that works, but I do think that there is a growing understanding that this is not fair. As you said, I think it's what, 85% of the advertising income now is through Google and Facebook. So yeah, we have a big problem here. I think there are a lot of different ways it's being approached. As Stephen was saying, membership is one major way to do it, but I think it's also, we're going to continue to see a bigger shift of philanthropists supporting independent media and thinking that they really should. They will still hopefully continue to support other charities and good causes, but I think more and more will do what Jeff Bezos did and buy the Washington Post. So I think hopefully it will not just be on foundations and large institutions like the European Union to support independent journalism, but it will come down to wealthy people plus people who are willing to take out a membership because they believe in the mission of publications that they support. So we'll see. I mean, I think in many ways we're still at the beginning of this kind of journey and we're all trying to figure it out.
Can I ask something to Jeremy?
Yeah? Sure.
Yeah, Jeremy, do you think that the main responsibility is like within the philanthropists, as you say, or like the bigger organizations to support it, or do you think there's also like a responsibility from news organizations themselves to tailor it to the readers a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, it's a collective responsibility if you put it like that. But I think definitely, I mean, as I said before, I've been running a independent nonprofit site for over 20 years. And I definitely think it's our obligation to come up with a model that works. And as you said before, we all have to do a much better job of looking at what our readers really need, not what we think they need, which has been the tradition of most journalists and editors and publishers is we think we produce important to our sites, but do they really need it? But it can also be as an informational need. So we all do have to figure that out. But I do think that wealthy people out there, international institutions, have to recognize the importance of independent media as well and their own role in that. We have seen, we can talk about this more later, but I do think the EU at least has started to put some money behind various initiatives to support investigative journalism and other types of content. And that's a big step. I mean, it's a huge step. We really would not have seen that probably 5-10 years ago. So there are these steps happening out there.
But if I listen carefully to you, Jeremy, then actually you say that journalism will be reliable and dependable on donations or grants for large, right?
Yeah. Other places, these so-called news deserts, where you just have huge expanses of the country which don't have local news any longer. And I just don't think, I think none of us really think advertising is going to be able to keep alive those types of publications in the future. I think huge ones like the New York Times, will probably be able to keep going. But the small and medium-sized publications, I think, as you just said, are going to have to depend on membership, larger donations, different funds that might be started. There's been so much talk about that the social media platforms creating funds that would go towards supporting independent journalism, which is also a problematic idea for different reasons. But I do think this new accelerate as we go forward.
And the COVID-19 crisis actually only increased the problems, the financial problems for journalism. Was it also for Are We Europe?
Yeah, as I explained before, we have like 3 streams of income, so to say.
Yeah.
And what we experience is, especially the studio side, and there we make, for other organizations, whether it's profit or non-profit, we make stories. And what we saw over there, that it stopped like instantly.
Totally, yeah.
Like
collapsed.
it was, it totally collapsed. And that's actually also the same time, because we started in March with membership, that we started to look into membership.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, some research was also done, and it showed that 40 to 60% of independent media actually suffered enormously from the COVID-19 crisis, and they had to fire or let the staff go, or maybe even facing bankruptcy. So it's a harsh time for journalism and independent media, right? But will it also have consequences for the content of independent media, this COVID-19 crisis? What do you think, Stijn?
In what way do you mean?
Well, maybe that because of the financial dire situation, the contents will suffer also.
Yeah.
Hopefully, of course not, but it's a question. Huh?
Hopefully not, yeah. So we haven't experienced this, and that is mainly because we have this network throughout Europe. So we don't have like the travel cost, for example. And we in that sense, I think we're very lucky with Are We Europe. But I do think in the long run, of course, if we do not have a sufficient financial, or if we don't have the financial resources, it will suffer. And there's not that much that we can do about it, I think. The only thing that we can do about it, of course, is try to look for new ways to finance it, and try to look for also maybe creative ways to create your stories.
What do you think, Jeremy? Is the quality also suffering from the COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, I think there's no way that can be avoided. Simply having less money means having less types of stories that need a lot of money to do. So as you can imagine, something like investigative journalism, which generally, not always, but generally takes longer periods of time to produce. You have teams of journalists working on it. I can imagine those types of stories have been shrinking up. But it's also, I think, not simply the lack of financial resources, but simply the attitude to have kind of all hands on deck, and taking journalists that maybe were doing other things before and having them concentrate just on COVID-related stories. So, I mean, this is one of the biggest stories, I think, of anyone's lifetime. So that's forced newsrooms to think differently, approach things differently, and plan differently.
So it might also inspire journalists to come with more and innovative ways to bring out the stories, and maybe also some solidarity, right, among journalists. Is that something that you discover in Are We Europe?
Well, innovative, I think we're used to working distributed, but in terms of solidarity, yeah, definitely. We have like this collective of journalists that actually do not only, say, hey, I'm working on this project or on this story, but they're also saying like, hey, if I can help you out with anything, then please just let me know. So I think in terms of solidarity among journalists and among organizations, yes, this is definitely a good sign, so to say, or there are some positive elements, aspects to take out of it. Yeah, for sure.
Silver line in the COVID-19 crisis.
It's actually, we made a magazine called The Silver Lining.
Oh, really?
Yeah. This was about, it was solutions journalism based. Yeah. So where we were looking for, what are the silver linings to this crisis? So there. Yeah.
And Press Start actually works mostly with journalists from repressive countries. what drives these journalists to actually continue doing their work despite the financial crisis, despite COVID-19, the repression, etc.? Jeremy?
Yeah, you'd have to ask them each and every one of them personally, but I think in many ways the crisis today has forced journalists to really reconsider why they got into the profession in the first place, and many of them do want to get the story out there, even under the most repressive obstacles. But I think a lot of the journalists that we're working with have been working in very difficult conditions for a long time. Obviously, this has made it worse for many of them, especially as governments have used the pandemic as an excuse to crack down and create more regulations for journalists to do their work. But I think we've really seen a lot of journalists that have bravely continued to get the story out no matter what. And I would just add to what was said about solutions journalism, because that's a big priority with us as well. And we've been working to spread the concept in Central and Eastern Europe. And I think this is another situation where journalists have been looking from country to country and trying to see what works, what are solutions to pandemic-related problems, not just on the health side, but society, issues like education and remote teaching, and how do you care for people at risk and things like that. So I do think this is a chance where journalists have taken to really step up and look around, which they might not normally have done previously. So there has been a lot of innovation in that area as well.
Because the irony, of course, is that on the one hand, the financial situation is dire for journalists, but because of the COVID-19 crisis, the hunger for independent information has increased immensely, right? But do journalists actually know how to benefit from that hunger for information? Is that something that you experience at Press Start or Transitions Online?
Well, I think partly it is trying to understand your value in times like this. I mean, we pivoted and we were already doing solutions journalism, already supporting it, but we felt that this was a time, as you just heard, that was particularly appropriate to encourage solutions-oriented thinking. That people were just getting depressed, are getting depressed by all the negativity out there, which also, as you said, there is this need for information, but there's also the risk that people become more and more depressed and just kind of tune out and turn off the news. So having solutions-oriented, kind of more optimistic stories that are out there, responses that are working, I think is a way that can actually benefit the greater public. So I think it just get back to your question. It's kind of seeing what your particular specific value might be in a situation like this is really key for all the media out there. Is your key value in giving people independent news as quickly as possible, or is it taking a step back and trying to put things into perspective? Is it doing investigative reporting? There's been a lot of great reporting out there into illegal tenders, illegal orders for medical equipment that have taken place at least across Central and Eastern Europe. And I think we have seen journalists kind of adapting to the situation, doing the best they can according to their own skills and capabilities.
Right. Now we have people try to convince them to pay for it.
Yeah.
But is that also something that you are experiencing at Are We Europe? Trying to come with solution journalism, being more optimistic, having also positive stories out there?
Yeah, that's something that we're aiming for. It's not always easy, to be fair. And what we experienced, because like not the last one, but the one before, there was the climate issue. And what we see over there is, especially for these type of stories, they're a little bit longer. You have to read them a little bit longer. So you really need to grab their attention. It is difficult, but it's very much possible. So to that extent, yeah, we're aiming for it. And I think that from time to time we're succeeding, but over here as well, we're making steps to become better at solutions-based journalism. Yeah.
Okay, so we can definitely say that there are challenges ahead for media and journalists. Next up, we will talk about solutions. Yep. So your model about memberships and Jeremy's model about crowdfunding. But first, we will switch to our guest coming from Uganda, our photographer, Sarah Waiswa. Sarah, are you there?
I am. I'm here.
Hi. Very welcome to the 14th episode of Emerging Stories. Sarah, how's it? You're now in Kenya, right? And not in Uganda. So how are you? How are you?
I'm okay. I think as well as can be expected.
Okay. You're not sick or having troubles with COVID-19, or do you have?
No.
Okay.
I'm healthy. Most of the people I know are healthy. I think people's assumptions that COVID would hit Africa hard didn't kind of pan out. So though we have seen, we have experienced a lockdown and various other measures, it hasn't been as bad as it's been in Europe and in the West, for example.
Yeah, and is that one of the reasons that you're not in Uganda, because you cannot go back to Uganda?
No, I've actually lived in Kenya for a while.
Okay.
I was born in Uganda, but have lived in Kenya mostly.
Okay. Good to hear. So you made some pictures for us. It's actually a story. Can you, as we are going to look at the pictures, can you share with us why you have made these pictures, or what is the story about?
I think early on when, when there was talk of COVID and kind of COVID broke out, a lot of, there was a lot of people were afraid in terms of jobs, people cutting back. There was a lockdown which was initiated. And so it was important for me to see, what people, how people were surviving. And so this story is about a young mother who lives in one of the largest settlements in Kenya. She's HIV positive, single mom, and just kind of trying to take care of her children while also navigating the pandemic. And so I spent some time with her in her home with her children. And as you can see, she was sick quite a bit. In this image, I had accompanied her to one of the hospitals, and she had just gotten a shot. Of course, her kids were at home. Here, they're outside playing because, of course, schools were closed. So just basically kind of trying to see how they were surviving. And a lot of what she was surviving on before was, just donations from the church. But, of course, churches were also closed. So, the goal of the project was just to kind of see how people, for example, informal settlements were coping during the pandemic.
And are they coping? The pictures actually show us people, but you cannot really tell whether they are having troubles or coping with the situation. Can you share something with us?
Yeah, I think what ended up happening is, especially for her, she was still getting help from some church members, and was also doing some odd jobs here and there when she was in good health. Because like I said at the time that I took those images, she wasn't feeling very well. So she was working when she could, when she was in good health. As one of the shots shows them kind of, having their breakfast. So they were coping. I mean, I think you'll find that a lot of people in rural settlements are quite resilient.
Yeah, it's great to see how resilient they are, actually. So what does the future of photojournalism looks like for you personally?
I think, there's so many stories to tell. I think coming from a continent that where the stories have often been told by others, I think for us, we're just now starting to tell our own stories and have our stories published. So I think the future is bright. I think I think that we we as local journalists will continue to tell these stories.
And what is your next project about? Can you already share that with us?
Yeah, I'm looking at teen moms, particularly during this pandemic. There have been a lot of, of course, because the kids have been out of school, and so there has been a rise kind of in teen pregnancy. So my next story is going to focus on that.
Yeah, we heard indeed that it's a larger problem. Is that only in Kenya, also in Uganda, or are you going to make pictures in both countries?
In Kenya, because I'm here.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. I wish you all the best, and hopefully we see more of your work later on. Thank you again, and best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's go back to the topic of the day. Who pays for journalism nowadays? Before the break, we were diving into the problems, more or less. Let's go to what possible solutions are there. Are We Europe has a membership model. Can you actually share with us how it looks like?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's also interesting to talk a little bit like how we came there, because as I mentioned before, we had like this multiple streams of revenue, but for us it was very difficult to not only to monetize that, but also to try to capture that in one thing. Like, we're doing so many things at the same time, and how do we get this unified model, so to say? So I started looking into membership. What does it mean? When should you apply it? And basically what we started with was a research in March by just starting a conversation with our readers, reading what other companies are doing, and also reading best practices. So that's what we started with. We have been producing our quarterly magazine for quite some time already. So for us, it would be very straightforward to put that in the membership package, so to say. We also have multimedia stories where we go to countries and make these stories with local journalists. So that was also kind of, okay, that it makes a lot of sense to put that into the package. But what we really learned from talking mainly with our readers is that they wanted to have more than just these transactional things. They wanted to be involved. Like, how do you create such a story? Can we talk with the journalist? Can you maybe make a making of about it, or behind the scenes, or can we maybe propose a topic? So those were the things actually that we thought, okay, it's not only about creating these stories, it's also about making sure that people feel involved and people feel part of this club, as we always say it. And that's for us kind of what it looks like right now. So we have all these elements, as I mentioned before, but we also have these forms of being interactive with our readers, or with our members, of course.
And that's why you choose for the term membership rather than subscriptions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And how many members do you have?
We have 250 members right now, but the thing is that we're transitioning, because we used to have a subscription model as well. And basically we're transitioning right now to membership. So far it's going pretty well, but we have been communicating about that since 2 to 3 months, more or less, on a low level, because at the same time in the back end, so to say, so to make sure that we have all the infrastructure to support this membership, we're working on that as well. And we actually want to launch a campaign beginning of 2021 to really explore and to really share it with the world, so to say, that we became membership driven. Yeah.
And from how many different countries inside Europe you have your members?
I think we have a representative of almost all countries, and also a lot from the US, actually. So that's interesting as well to see.
They still want to know how we Europeans are doing.
Exactly, how we're taking a look at the problems in the world right now.
Okay.
So that's interesting. Yeah, but from most countries, it might be the 1 or 2 not.
And how many members do you need to have if you want to be break even, actually?
For us to be break even, it's 2,500 members.
So you're not there yet.
We're not there yet, but we're making good progress right now.
Very good. And Jeremy, you brought with us a video about Press Start, right? Shall we have a look at that and then come back to you?
Sure.
Okay. Seems easy enough. So can everyone apply? But you are doing the screening. And what do you look at then?
Yeah, we are restricting applications only to journalists that work in countries that are considered not free or partially free. We're now using the criteria that Freedom House has developed over the years. So that is the restriction. So at least for now, if you're in most of Western Europe or the US, you cannot apply, but we are changing some of the criteria right now. We have a project that is supporting collaborative cross-border journalism in Europe these days. So we are encouraging collaborations between journalists from more repressive countries with those who are from countries that are considered free for now. In terms of the screening, that's something which we stress there in the video, and I think it's very important because there are a lot of crowdfunding platforms out there that let basically anyone apply, anyone put up a project. We are very careful about that, and we do look for background references, ask people to submit different recommendations, and it's very important. Obviously, we need journalists who have been producing quality journalism for years and are trustworthy. We need those types of journalists up there.
Absolutely. And then you're going to launch the crowdfund. And how do you then decide how much money is needed for this particular story?
It's really up to the journalists. When they apply, they have to submit a budget as well. So we all know where the money's going for. And then we go back and forth with them till we come up with a final figure. Yeah, you can see there's one up on the screen right now from Hungary. But it's really a back and forth process. And then we help them put together the campaign. We do a lot of the social media. We help them put together a video. We think it's really our obligation to do all of that. The journalists really just concentrate on producing good stories and kind of in a way outsourcing the promotion and outreach to us. And we also try very hard to find communities of people around the world who might be interested in that particular story. So obviously the people who are just interested in supporting free media, that's always going to be a pretty small percentage of the world's population. So we try to find communities of people that are interested in a specific topic. So if the story is an environmental one, for example, we might reach out to environmental activist groups to try to spread the message as well.
Yeah.
And of course, the journalists also help with doing promotion in their networks. But I think one other thing just to understand is that one of the reasons we think the platform is so needed is that most of the journalists we're working with do not have international networks or even maybe English language skills or foreign language skills to be able to tap into bigger international networks. So that's our role. It's really identifying people on the ground who could use the exposure and then helping them to reach people around the world.
Absolutely. And so how many journalists have you already helped through this crowdfunding platform?
I think we've got about 14 or 15 campaigns up there. We're mostly just limited by capacity. We just haven't had large funds of money to support a bigger staff. We think the need is there. When we make big announcements looking for applications, we tend to get quite a few. But it takes time. It might seem to many people who haven't done crowdfunding that it's pretty easy. You launch a campaign, you do a little bit of work, and then just wait for the money to roll in. But in fact, it's really a lot of work. And even working with journalists who might be very talented, very great writers, they don't necessarily have those skills to promote themselves. So that takes a long time. We're dealing with multiple languages, translating things. So for us to get an application, put up a campaign could take a month or two, even longer sometimes to get it up there. So that's been a big limitation for us just in terms of getting campaigns up there. But with the new project and other things we're working on, hopefully we can get up multiple campaigns each month, but we're not quite there yet.
So are these 14 campaigns that you mentioned, have they all been successful?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the majority of them have been successful, especially if the journalists are from Central and Eastern Europe, where our contacts are best because we've been working in this region for 25 years. I think all of those campaigns have been funded. If they're from places like Africa or South America, where our contacts are minimal, the success rate has not been 100%. So that's why if we have any partners listening to this broadcast who work in those areas, we'd also love to work with you and have you help us find good people on the ground that we can help promote.
Right. So marketing is actually a very big, important part of the job, for as well as for Jeremy, as for you, Stijn.
Yeah, definitely. And we're very aware of it because, you know, Europe, not the EU, but Europe doesn't really have a sexy image, in our opinion. And that's actually something that we try to change as well.
So it doesn't sell, you mean?
No, well, sex sells, I guess. But what we try to do, not only to make good stories, but also make them visually very appealing. So we are very aware that design is like a super important element of like the whole story that we create. So sometimes we have like this interaction between photographer, video, written journalist, but also audio producers to really make people, and especially young people, aware that the topic of Europe can also be super interesting if you take our approach or if you take a look at the stories.
But how do you find your audience then? And how do you reach out to them?
Well, we have our own channels, but I think it's very much in line with what Jeremy just said. What we try to do, because we have this big network of journalists, we always try to tap into their market, but also if we have, for example, a magazine, the most recent one was about was the climate issue, then we try to reach out to organizations, to partner organizations that we can work together with. So those are multiple ways in which we can approach it. Sometimes we do influencers, we're a little bit careful with that, but we have taken that road a couple of times. So that's the way that we approach it. But it is difficult because, again, there's like this content overload and you have to make sure that you're outstanding to that extent. So it's not easy. But I think that one of the core elements for us, at least, is to make it, in terms of design, also like super attractive. Yeah.
And are the members who pay for the crowdfunding action and the campaigns, are they also coming from Eastern Europe or the pre-accession countries, or do you see also that they come from other parts of the world?
It's a real mix. I think we've had cases where, surprisingly, quite a lot of people came from the local country as part of that journalist network, and we've had instances where almost no one came. I think, again, it partly depends on if the practice is widespread in that country of crowdfunding or not. By now, there are a lot of local platforms as well, so people are more and more used to it. But it really depends. Is there a middle class that has disposable income to spend on these types of things? A lot of the countries where we're working, that kind of community would be really very small. So that's when, depending on international audiences, is all the more important. But I would just point out again that what we're doing is also somewhat of an experiment, because a lot of the crowdfunding journalism projects that are out there, Dear Correspondent in the Netherlands, Kraut Reporter in Germany, a lot of those have been producing journalism which is useful in people's daily lives who live in those countries. We're asking people halfway across the world to support journalism in a country where they probably don't know anyone, they've never been there. maybe they're part of a diaspora group, but chances are they aren't. So again, it gets back to what I was saying at the beginning. We're trying to convince people that journalism is something worth supporting and some kind of public good. Steen had mentioned climate change earlier, and I think somewhat similar to that idea, with the exception of those countries that are on the front lines of climate change who are really experiencing it. Yes, some of us might have been affected by weather changes, dramatic weather changes and things like that, but it is something kind of abstract for a lot of people, but they're starting to understand that they need to change their behavior and maybe invest some money in supporting initiatives designed to counter climate change. So I think this is the kind of movement that we all need to push harder with in terms of journalism. And as part of membership, it's part of crowdfunding in many ways. Membership is a form of crowdfunding, although as Steen said, you do want to try that it's not a just one-off donation, but something that you nurture over the years and create more of a community around your website. But I think more or less we're all talking about the same thing, and we don't need millions and millions of people, but we do need that 2,000 members, 500 members, whatever, 50 people to support a crowdfunding campaign. So I think we all believe those people are out there, but we do have to figure out how to find them.
How to find them. Yeah. And it sounds also to me that you're tapping into the same kind of audiences. So you are also competitors, right?
Yeah, to a certain extent, yeah. I see, or the problems that you described, we experience, and we are experiencing them as well. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So,
but I think we're all part of a team though as well, yeah. Because I do think that if either of us convinces people, if we convince a person that it's important to invest in journalism, that person is going to be more likely to take out a membership somewhere else or support a campaign somewhere else. It's really a mentality shift, and I think we're all in this together. You mentioned earlier in the broadcast about collaboration and how we can all work together, and I think this is one of the ways. If we collectively create campaigns to convince people journalism is worth supporting, it benefits all of us.
Actually, that's something that I experienced as well. Like in this research I had, I called and I talked with a lot of other media, and they were super willing to share their information on how what their process was, what their learnings were. So to that extent, yeah, it's not only competition, but it's also helping each other out. Yeah.
And listening to your stories and your emerging stories, I think it is also about what is the story of that particular journalist about, right? What makes me attractive to become a member or to actually donate to your crowdfunding? Yeah. I mean, it must be appealing to me, the story, and not so much the journalist itself, but the story, what's it about? Yeah. So, and that is something you mentioned earlier, Jeremy. You have to do more research about how to attract the audience, right? What do they want to know about? What do they want to read about? Is that also something you try to initiate?
To some extent. I mean, we do that much more for our magazine Transitions, which I mentioned before. I think for Press Start, for crowdfunding individual campaigns, it's really a combination of the two. I think that obviously we need to find topics that audiences are interested in. Again, climate change is something which is on the agenda. Minority rights, obviously, with what's happening in many places around the world. But I do come back to what I said at the beginning, I think is at the core of what we're trying to do at Press Start, which is really tell the story of the journalist. Because I do believe there are a lot of people out there that maybe they're interested in the topic, maybe not, but if they see that there's a journalist out there who's bravely trying to do this type of reporting under a very repressive regime, fighting the obstacles to get that story out there. I mean, that's dramatic. And I think that's something which we believe, if we tell the story right of the individual journalist, can also motivate people to give. So, and if you give them a reason beyond just story, but also the individual, I think there's a greater number of people that we can tap into.
Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what we're trying to do is trying to get people enthusiastic about the European story. And I think a big part of that is not only the story itself. So what we often try to do is take a certain topic and try to shed the light from different countries. You know, how is Norway tackling, or a person in Norway tackling, or how is a person from Spain dealing with it? So the background over there is super important. So we, not always, but we aim to start from the personal perspective and also try to see, okay, what is the impact of this particular story on somebody's lives? Because that, again, it's about getting a relationship with somebody. That's very important for us. And once you see that the personal elements coming into play, then that is something that people resonate with. That's at least our experience to that extent.
Is that also the aim of Press Start? Are you getting back to the audience or the people who donated via this crowdfunding and sharing with them? It was a success thanks to you. We reached out to so many people, yes or no?
Yes, yeah, we've been doing that. We have a blog up on the site as well, which reports on what actually happened after the story was published, because that's been a goal from the beginning. We have to do a better job at it. We have to build that community of previous donors better and reach out to them again. But we are trying to do that. And it's always been our belief that those donors, they want to know what happened because the story was published, not simply that their money went towards getting the story out there, but was there a public discussion launched? Was awareness raised? If it was an investigative story, did anyone get in trouble because of that? Were there any farther term consequences because of that? So that's what we're reporting in the blog and trying to get back to people about these success stories, because I think ultimately people do want to see what happened with their money. They might feel good when they donated that first time. Maybe they'll forget about it. But if there's been some kind of success story out of the fact that they gave, you're much more likely, obviously, to get them to donate again and to feel like their money was worth it.
Absolutely. And do you receive some feedback from your members?
Yeah.
Can you share something with us?
Well, it's super diverse, actually, because actually it was this morning that I call with someone who wanted to initiate a story that had to do with the Bauhaus and the design and how it can affect the European story. So that is something that is not initiated by us, but it's by a member because he saw what we produced so far. But we also have like super diverse responses to what we're making. Some people like heavily agree or disagree, but that's also something that we try to do. You know, we try to start a debate or a conversation about a topic or a story that we're making. But it's a lot of fun because as I mentioned before, we're not 100% there yet with our membership, but I am doing the initial talks, and so far people are actually very grateful. Like there hasn't been like a real European media or a real European journalism outlet there yet, and they're very grateful, and they want to support us, and sometimes they propose ideas, or sometimes they give feedback on the stories. But overall, the conversation that we have are super valuable, interesting. They feed into new stories. So to that extent, it's very valuable for us as a newsroom to keep on having these conversations. Yeah.
Wonderful. And we have to round up, sadly, because it's very interesting.
Yeah.
I hope our viewers actually want to donate to the crowdfunding Press Start and become a member of RB Europe. Yeah, both. Yeah. Why not? Mm. We can do it. But before we wrap up, I have a final question for the both of you. And that is, to your point of view, what does the media landscape look like in 2050? So 30 years from now. Jeremy, can I start with you?
That's not fair. I thought I'd have a little bit of time to think about it.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Well, I think tapping into what we've already discussed, but just accelerating it, taking it to different levels. I do think you'll still have these huge outlets out there like the New York Times, the Guardian, and so on. But I do think you will have a much greater percentage of organizations like us, like the organizations represented here today, who are funded from alternate sources beyond advertising before classic subscriptions. So I do think hope, maybe this is partly just optimism, but I do think you have a much greater segment of the media that looks like us. And you'll have probably a whole bunch of different players that are built on just delivering their content through social media as well, and different formats that we can't even think of right now. So I do think it will be a mix. I mean, I do think you will have those big players. You'll have some probably a rung down that, still pretty big, but you'll have a hopefully huge, vibrant community of nonprofit, sustainable media organizations that are successful.
And still alive. Stijn, short?
Yeah, this is a bit unfair because I actually had more or less the same answer as Jeremy does. So there is some benefit actually in starting. I do think that bigger legacy media outlets are still there. They have to because, you know, they're fulfilling like a need that we cannot really do, covering the daily news. But on the other hand, I think you have like these smaller initiatives like ours that are very often maybe focusing on, you know, only one element and really try to get a community around it. And I think that's going to be the future of journalism in 2050.
Okay, thank you for sharing. And thank you all for watching. Many thanks to my guest of this 14th episode of Emerging Stories, the talk show about the future and the importance of independent journalism. Next week, I will be back with a new episode, and then we're going to look about robot journalism. So if you're interested, stay tuned and have a look at us. Every day, Pakhuis de Zwijger has livecast about different subjects. If you want to know more, check their website for the agenda. For now, I thank you very much for watching. Have a good evening. Goodbye.